All right. It's day 31. I know that because Dara keeps the calendar. She scratches it into the drywall beside the service entrance with a roofing nail every morning before anyone else is up. I asked her once why she bothers. She said if we stop counting days, we stop being people. I didn't argue with that. My name is Nolan Rigby. I'm 34 years old, and I'm sitting on an overturned milk crate in the loading dock of what used to be a Kroger on Route 9, just outside Fredericksburg, Virginia. We've been here since day 11. 20 people now. 23 if you count the Volkov family that showed up Tuesday, but they haven't committed to staying, and I've learned not to count anyone who hasn't committed. I'm recording this on a Tascam field recorder that belonged to a podcast guy named Emmett, who died on day 19. He'd been documenting everything since the beginning. Good instinct, terrible luck. He went to check the diesel level in the generator at dusk, and he was not fast enough getting back inside. I'm continuing his work, not because I think anyone's going to find these files and piece together the great historical record of what happened, but because talking into this thing every morning is the only 15 minutes of my day that feel like they belong to me. So here's the situation as of this morning. The military failed. I don't mean they lost a battle. I mean the organizational structure that was supposed to protect 330 million people broke apart in less than a week. Fort A.P. Hill, which is close enough that we could hear their artillery for the first 3 nights, has been silent since day 7. We sent a truck out to the perimeter on day 14. The gates were open. Vehicles were still running. Nobody was inside them. That's where we are. Past the part where anyone is coming. Firmly inside the part where we figure it out ourselves. Or we don't. I should explain how the group functions, because I think that matters more than repeating the Outbreak story everyone already knows. The Kroger is a good building. Concrete block walls up to about 6 feet, steel panels siding above that, flat commercial roof. The loading dock faces a tree line and a drainage ditch, which is bad for sight lines, but good because nothing wanders out of woods very often. They prefer pavement, roads, parking lots, open ground where they walked when they were alive. We've all noticed that. They follow habits they can't possibly remember, and nobody wants to think too hard about what that means. We sealed the front entrance with 2 shipping containers from the Lowe's distribution lot across the highway, pushed them into place with a front-end loader that Marcus knew how to operate. And that single piece of knowledge, operating a front-end loader, might be the reason 20 people are still alive. Skills matter now in ways that have nothing to do with what mattered 5 weeks ago. I was a regional sales manager for a plumbing supply company. That's useless. But I can do arithmetic, and I don't panic when things get loud. And apparently that makes me the person people look at when a decision needs to be made. I didn't want that. Still don't. But the alternative is no one making decisions, and we tried that for about 2 days before it almost killed us. The group, as of this morning, 20 adults, 4 children. Ages range from 6 to 61. Dara handles medical, though she was a vet tech, not a nurse. Marcus handles physical security and construction. A woman named Trish, former restaurant manager, runs inventory and rationing. And I hold the morning meeting, settle disputes, and make calls when the group can't agree. We eat twice a day. We run the generator 2 hours in the morning and 2 at night. We keep 4 people on watch at all times in rotating 6-hour shifts. We go out in teams of no fewer than 4, always armed, never past the 3-mile radius we've scouted, and never, ever after 4 p.m. These are the rules. They're not complicated. They work because everyone follows them, and because the dead are slow and predictable and not as dangerous as the living. I'll come back to that. I want to be precise about this because Emmett's early recordings are full of speculation that turned out to be wrong, and I don't want to add to that. The dead are reanimated human bodies. I don't know how. Nobody does. The first cases appeared on the East Coast roughly 36 days ago, clustered around hospital morgues and funeral homes. Within 48 hours, it was in every state. The speed of that spread doesn't match any transmission model I've ever heard a news anchor try to explain. And by day 4, there were no more news anchors, so the question just hangs there. They are slow, walking pace. They do not run. I have never seen one run, and no one in our group has either. That's important because it means a healthy, alert person on open ground can always get away from them. Always. The danger is not speed. The danger is numbers and corners and darkness, and the fact that human beings get tired and distracted and emotional and the dead do not. They respond to sound. Not light, not smell, as far as we can tell. Sound. A car engine will pull every one of them within a quarter-mile radius. A gunshot is worse. We learned early to treat firearms as a last resort, not a first option. Marcus made short spears out of steel conduit and sharpened rebar. They work. You have to destroy the head. Everyone knows that part. The movies got that right, at least. They do not communicate. They do not cooperate. They do not plan. What they do is accumulate. One follows a sound. Others follow that one's movement. Within an hour, a dozen can become 200, all pressing in the same direction, with no coordination but no disagreement either. That's the thing about them that gets under your skin. They never argue. They never hesitate. They just keep arriving. The bite is fatal. Infection to death is somewhere between 6 and 14 hours. We know this from direct observation 3 times now, and I'm not going to describe those. Reanimation follows death by roughly 40 minutes. That's what the dead are. Slow, loud-seeking, numerous, and permanent. Every person who dies, from any cause, reanimates. That's the part that changes everything. It means the math only moves in one direction. Every natural death, every accident, every fight, every illness that goes untreated adds to their side and subtracts from ours. The military didn't lose because the dead were strong. They lost because the dead don't stop. And institutions need things like supply chains and communications and sleep. We don't have institutions anymore. We have 20 people in a grocery store. So here's why I'm recording today instead of just keeping the count. Yesterday, around 2 in the afternoon, a man walked up the service road from the direction of Route 1. Alive, mid-40s, good boots. He had a deer rifle slung over his shoulder and a military-style pack. And he stopped about 60 yards out and raised both hands, which is the right thing to do. We have signs posted. His name is Glenn Tavish. Says he walked down from a group up near Stafford. Says they've been on the Quantico perimeter, living out of the Marine base housing, running patrols. Here's what Glenn told us. His group has 40 people and working vehicles and access to a fuel depot that's still a third full. They have antibiotics. They have a functioning shortwave set. And they want to consolidate with any surviving groups in the corridor between Fredericksburg and Dumfries. That sounds good. On paper, it sounds like exactly what you'd want to hear on day 31. But Glenn also told us that his group has a leader named Bryce Kellen, former Master Sergeant, and that Bryce expects consolidated groups to follow his command structure, his rules, his rationing, his patrol assignments, and that people who join don't leave. Dara asked Glenn what happens if someone wants to leave. Glenn looked at his boots and said it hadn't come up. So that's the problem this morning. We have an offer. Resources, vehicles, medicine, communication, everything we need. It comes with a man none of us have met who believes the crisis entitles him to authority over anyone who accepts his help. And my group is looking at me. Not because I'm in charge. I've been very careful never to call myself that. But because I'm the one who said, from day one, that how we treat each other is the only thing that still belongs to us. Now I have to figure out if I believe that enough to turn down 40 people, antibiotics, and a way to talk to the rest of the world. We held the meeting at 8 a.m. in the main floor of the Kroger, between the empty shelving units we use as a common area. Everyone attended, even the Volkov family, which I took as a sign that they'd decided they were part of this, whether they said so or not. Glenn sat on a folding chair to my left. I told him he was welcome to present his offer to the full group and answer any question anyone asked. He agreed. He was calm and articulate, and I noticed that he watched everyone's face while he talked, the way a man does when he's been trained to read a room. He described the Quantico setup: fenced perimeter, partially cleared, generator power, rainwater collection with purification tablets, a medical station run by a former Navy corpsman, 3 working trucks, and a diesel reserve that would last, by his estimate, another 2 months at current usage. Then he described Bryce: career Marine, served 2 deployments, ran a private security firm before the outbreak. Glenn said Bryce organized the Quantico group in the first week when everyone was still in shock, and that the structure he imposed was the reason 40 people were alive. Marcus asked the first question: how many people had tried to leave? Glenn said 2, early on. They were talked out of it. Dara asked what talked out of it meant. Glenn said Bryce explained the risks of leaving, and they agreed to stay. Trish asked whether the group voted on decisions. Glenn said Bryce consulted with senior members but made final calls himself. For speed. For clarity. I watched the room while these answers landed. I could see the split forming in real time. Half the faces were calculating the antibiotics and the fuel. The other half were calculating the cost. A man named Joel, who'd been a long-haul truck driver and didn't talk much, said something that landed hard. He said, "We've been here 3 weeks and nobody's told me I can't leave. That's worth more than diesel." A woman named Priya, who had 2 of the 4 children, said, "Diesel keeps my kids warm in October. Principles don't." Both of them were right. That's the thing about these decisions. Everyone is right from where they're sitting, and the seats are not the same. I told the group we weren't deciding today. I wanted 2 days. I wanted to send a small team north to see the Quantico set up firsthand before we committed 23 people to something we couldn't undo. I wanted to look Bryce in the eye. Glenn said that was reasonable. He also said Bryce expected an answer within the week, and that the offer wasn't open-ended. I said I understood. I didn't say what I was actually thinking, which was that a man who puts a deadline on an offer of safety is selling something, and I wanted to know the price. After the meeting broke, I walked the store. I do this most mornings. It helps me think, and it reminds me what we've built. Aisle 3 is sleeping quarters. We laid down foam padding and sleeping bags between the shelving units. Each family or individual has a section roughly the size of a parking space, marked with duct tape. It's cramped and it smells like 20 people who bathe with cold water and rationed soap. But it's home. People have pinned up photos. The kids drew pictures on the bare wall with markers. Someone hung a wind chime made of spoons near the entrance, and it rattles when the loading dock door opens, which serves as both a decoration and an alarm. Aisle 7 is the armory. Spears, 2 shotguns, a .22 rifle, box cutters, a fire axe. Not much, but maintained. Marcus inspects everything daily. The pharmacy section, which was mostly cleared out before we arrived, still has a back stock room that Dara organized into a medical station. Bandages, ibuprofen, 1 course of amoxicillin that she's saving for something that will kill someone without it. 3 EpiPens. A blood pressure cuff that she uses more for comfort than diagnosis, because knowing your blood pressure is normal is one of the few reassurances she can still offer. The roof is our watchtower. We built a sandbag parapet around the HVAC unit and posted a permanent lookout. From up there, you can see the highway overpass, the Lowe's lot, the tree line, and about a mile of Route 9 in each direction. On a clear day, you can see the church steeple in town, which is where a group of 8 people lived until day 22, when they didn't answer our signal mirror anymore. This is what we have. It isn't much by any standard that existed 5 weeks ago, but we built it with consensus. Every rule was discussed. Every assignment was volunteered or rotated. When someone disagreed, we talked until we found something everyone could live with, and twice we changed plans because someone who wasn't me had a better idea. That matters. I know Priya is right about the diesel. I know that principles are thin comfort when the temperature drops. But I also know that the thing most likely to kill the 20 people in this building is not the dead outside. It's the moment we stop believing we have a say in what happens to us. The dead took the world. I will not let the living take the one thing we salvaged from it. But I might be wrong. And the weight of being wrong about this is 23 lives, 4 of them children. We left at 6 a.m. on day 32. 4 of us, me, Marcus, Dara, and Glenn as guide. Dara argued she should stay. I told her I needed someone with medical assessment skills to evaluate their corpsman station, and someone whose judgment I trusted to read the group dynamics. She didn't like it, but she came. Marcus drove. We took the box truck we'd salvaged from the Lowe's lot. Diesel engine, loud but heavy enough that a handful of dead won't stop it. Glenn rode shotgun and directed us north on Route 1. The road was what the road always is now. Cars stopped where they stalled or where their drivers died. Some pushed to the shoulder by other survivors. Some burned. We wove between them at 15 miles an hour, and Marcus watched the mirrors while I watched the road ahead. We passed through a stretch of strip malls south of Stafford that was thick with them. Maybe 80, clustered around what used to be a Target. They turned toward the engine sound, of course, started walking. But we were through the corridor in 4 minutes, and by the time they reached the road, we were a half-mile north. That's the arithmetic of the dead. They react, but they can't anticipate. They follow, but they can't intercept. Every encounter with them is a math problem. And as long as you don't let emotion override the math, you get through. The trouble is that the math doesn't always account for everything. A stalled car you didn't see, a bridge out, a crowd around a blind corner. Emmett's math was fine. He was 12 seconds too slow on a return sprint, and 12 seconds was the margin. We reached the Quantico perimeter at 7:40. The base housing section is at the southeastern edge, behind a chain-link fence that someone reinforced with concertina wire and sections of highway guardrail. It looked competent, organized. 2 guards at the gate with actual rifles, not rebar spears. They recognized Glenn, checked us for bites with a flashlight inspection that was thorough and impersonal, and let us through. First impression: this was a real operation. Gardens and raised beds between housing units. A water collection system using tarps and rain gutters feeding into food-grade barrels. A vehicle bay with 3 trucks and a parts bench. Laundry lines. A patrol schedule posted on a board near the central building. Second impression: it was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Controlled quiet. People moved with purpose, but they didn't linger. Nobody was sitting around talking. No kids playing in the open. The housing unit doors were closed despite the mild weather. Dara leaned over to me while we walked and said, just low enough that Glenn wouldn't hear, "This looks like a duty station, not a neighborhood." I didn't respond, but I logged it. He met us in what had been a community recreation room. Folding tables arranged in a U shape, map on the wall with pins and string, radio equipment on a desk in the corner, a shortwave set with a car battery backup. Two men stood near the back door, not threatening, just present. Bryce Kellen was about 50, lean, short gray hair, a face that looked like it had been patient for a very long time and had decided to stop. He shook my hand with exactly the right amount of pressure and said he appreciated us making the drive. He was smart. I want to be clear about that. Nothing that follows should suggest he wasn't. He laid out his operation cleanly. Patrol routes, resource projections, a 6-month sustainability plan that accounted for caloric needs, fuel consumption, and estimated dead population density in the surrounding area. He had charts. He had timelines. He had the confidence of a man who had thought further ahead than anyone else in the room and knew it. Then he got to the structure. His word was discipline. Everyone contributes. Tasks are assigned based on ability. Patrol duty is mandatory. Rations are equal but controlled through a central distribution. Weapons are stored in a locked armory and checked out for specific duties only. Disputes are brought to him. Departures are discouraged. I asked what discouraged meant. He said, "I explained to people that leaving the perimeter alone is suicide, and that taking resources we all need is theft. Most people understand that." I asked what happened to the ones who didn't understand. He looked at me for a long 3 seconds and said, "Everyone's understood so far." Marcus, who was prior Army himself, asked about the chain of command. Who was second? What happened if Bryce was incapacitated? Whether there was any mechanism for the group to override a decision. Bryce said the structure was flat by necessity. He made calls because someone had to. When things stabilized, they'd formalize something. Right now, the priority was survival. I recognized the logic. I'd even used parts of it myself in the first week, when our group was scattered and terrified, and needed someone to say, "Do this, then this, then this." The difference was that I'd let go of that authority the moment people could think clearly. Bryce had held on to it. And the moment you hold on to emergency power past the emergency, it stops being emergency power. Dara asked to see the medical station. The corpsman, a quiet man named Webb, showed her the supplies. She came back to me 20 minutes later and said 2 things. First, they had real antibiotics, suture kits, and IV supplies. Enough to handle trauma that would currently be a death sentence in our Kroger. Second, she'd seen bruising on one of the women in the housing unit that didn't look accidental. And when she'd asked about it, the woman had changed the subject and walked away. I didn't bring that up with Bryce, not yet, because if I was wrong, I'd be poisoning a relationship we might need. And if I was right, confronting it on his ground with his people at his back was the worst possible way to handle it. We drove south at noon. I had a lot to think about. I let a full day pass before I called the group together. Day 33. I wanted people to have heard the basics from Marcus and Dara first, so the meeting wouldn't be a briefing. It would be a decision. I told them what we'd seen. All of it. The infrastructure, the supplies, the medical capacity, the organization, the guards, the quiet, the bruise. Dara confirmed everything I said. Marcus, who doesn't editorialize, said the physical security was superior to ours by a significant margin and left it there. Then I told them my honest assessment, because they deserved it. I said that Bryce Kellen was competent and probably sincere in believing his way was the right way. I said that his operation would survive longer than ours on raw logistics, and I said that joining it meant accepting a social contract we hadn't agreed to, enforced by a man who would not let us renegotiate it later, and that once we were inside those walls with our resources folded into his, the option to leave would exist in theory, but not in practice. Priya asked whether I was recommending we refuse. I said I was recommending we understand exactly what we were agreeing to before we agreed, and that I wanted to hear what everyone thought. The conversation lasted 2 hours. I'm going to compress it because most of it was people circling the same two positions that had been obvious from the start. One side, survival requires consolidation. More people means more labor, more defense, more skills. The dead don't care about our governance philosophy. Winter is coming. We need those medical supplies. We can deal with Bryce once we're safe. Other side, we've watched every institution in this country collapse in a month. Government, military, police. Not because the dead overwhelmed them, but because the systems that held them together required trust and accountability. And the crisis stripped both away. Building another institution on blind obedience and calling it safety is repeating the mistake at smaller scale. Joel said, "I'd rather die free in a grocery store than live managed on a base." Priya said, "My daughter is 6. She doesn't get to choose death for a principle." The room was split almost exactly in half. 10 for going, 8 against, 4 undecided, including the Volkov family, who listened to everything and said nothing. I didn't call a vote. I said I had one more thing to try first, and I asked for 2 more days. What I didn't say was that the thing I wanted to try was the radio. Bryce had a shortwave. We didn't. But Emmett's recorder had picked up a signal 6 days ago, faintly, on a frequency I hadn't been able to identify. Someone else was out there, broadcasting. And if there was a third option, I owed it to everyone to find it before we committed to the only 2 we could see. Emmett's recorder has a built-in FM receiver. Garbage range, maybe 10 miles on a good day. But the signal I'd caught wasn't FM. It was AM. 1640 on the dial, almost at the top of the band. And it had come through as a burst of static, with a human voice underneath. I'd listened to the recording a dozen times. The voice was female, calm and methodical. I could make out fragments. "If you are receiving this, we transmit at 0600 and 1800. And cooperative structure, no hierarchy. And then static ate the rest. On day 33, after the meeting, I climbed to the roof at 5:45 a.m. with the Tascam and a 20-foot wire antenna I'd made from speaker cable. Marcus thought I was wasting time. He might have been right. But I clipped the wire to the building's lightning rod mount and tuned to 1640 and waited. At 6:02, the signal came in. It was stronger this time. Still scratchy, still cutting in and out. But I could hear full sentences. The woman identified herself as Lena Park. She said she was broadcasting from a community called Anchor, located in the Shenandoah Valley, west of the Blue Ridge. She said Anchor had been operating for 22 days, had a population of approximately 60 people, and had been established by a group of former municipal workers, teachers, and a civil engineer who'd survived the first week together. She described their structure: elected rotating council, shared labor, open borders, anyone could join, anyone could leave, and departure meant you took your fair share of portable supplies with you. Decisions were made by majority vote for daily operations, and by 2/3 majority for anything affecting safety. She described their defenses. The valley geography created natural choke points. They'd barricaded 2 road passes and maintained watch. The surrounding mountains kept dead density low. She described their needs: seeds, medical personnel, mechanical skills, fuel, and more people. Because 60 wasn't enough to maintain the perimeter and the farming and the patrols and everything else that survival demanded. She said they transmitted twice daily. She said the frequency was open for responses. She said, "We are not coming to you. We are telling you where we are. The choice to move is yours, and it will always be yours." I sat on that roof for a long time after the signal ended. The morning was cool, and the sky was that washed-out blue that autumn starts with. And I could see 3 of the dead moving slowly along the highway overpass, going nowhere, following nothing, just walking the path they'd always walked. I went downstairs and asked for one more meeting. Day 34. 3rd meeting in 4 days, and I could feel the fatigue in the room. People wanted a decision, not another discussion. I understood that. I was tired too. I laid out 3 options. Option 1, stay at the Kroger. Maintain what we have. Ride into winter with our current supplies, which Trish estimated would sustain us through late November at current rationing. After that, we'd need to range further for food, which meant more exposure, more risk, more fuel we didn't have. Option 2, join Bryce at Quantico. Gain resources, security, and medical capacity. Accept his structure, lose autonomy, probably permanent. Option 3, move west to the Shenandoah. Longer journey, maybe 90 miles through territory we hadn't scouted. Higher transit risk. But a larger group, a democratic structure, a defensible valley, and agricultural potential that a parking lot in Fredericksburg would never have. The room moved differently this time. The signal had changed the geometry. It wasn't just stay or submit anymore. There was a 3rd point on the map, and that 3rd point made people rethink the other 2. Marcus said the transit risk was serious. 90 miles in a box truck through unknown dead density with children and limited fuel was not a Sunday drive. He wasn't wrong. Dara said the medical upside of Quantico was real and immediate, but that the Shenandoah's agricultural model was the only option that scaled past 6 months. She wasn't wrong either. Priya asked how we knew Anchor was real, how we knew the broadcast wasn't a lure. I said we didn't. I said every option carried uncertainty. Staying risked starvation. Quantico risked subjugation. The valley risked the unknown. I said I wouldn't pretend any choice was safe, because none of them were. And anyone who claimed their option was the safe one was selling something. Glenn, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. He said Bryce wouldn't take the decision well. He said it wasn't a threat, just a reality. Bryce had invested in this corridor strategy, and a group choosing to leave the area rather than join him would feel like a rejection of his authority. Glenn said he didn't know what that would look like in practice, but he wanted us to understand. I thanked him for his honesty. And then I said something I'd been thinking about since the first morning meeting. I said no one in this room had to go where the majority went. I said if the group split, we'd divide resources fairly, help each side prepare, and separate without animosity. I said the worst thing we could do was force 23 people down a single path when they fundamentally disagreed about what survival looked like. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of agreement. The quiet of people realizing that the question had changed. It wasn't, what do we do? It was, who are we to each other? And does that survive disagreement? The vote happened that evening. Not a vote on what everyone would do, a vote on what each person would do. I asked each adult to state their choice privately to Trish, who would tally without names. Then we'd share the totals and figure out logistics. The results? 6 adults for Quantico, 11 adults for the Shenandoah. 3 undecided, asking for one more day. Priya was going to Quantico. Her 2 children went with her. I expected that, and I respected it. She looked at me when the results were announced and said, "Don't judge me for this." I told her the whole point was that nobody was going to judge her for this. She was protecting her kids with the information she had. That was her right. Yoel was going to the Shenandoah. So were Dara and Marcus. So was I. The 3 undecided were the Volkov family. Mikhail Volkov came to me that night while I was on roof watch and sat down beside me without saying anything for about 10 minutes. Then he said, in careful English, "In Russia, I trusted a strong man once. My family left Russia because of what that trust cost. We will go to the valley. 14 for the Shenandoah, 6 for Quantico." That was the split. I spent the next day working out logistics with Trish. We divided food, water, medical supplies, weapons, and fuel by head count. Fair shares, no argument. The Quantico group would take the smaller truck we'd been using for supply runs. Glenn would guide them north. The Shenandoah group would take the box truck and a sedan we'd kept fueled for emergencies. Marcus plotted the route. South on Route 1 to bypass the worst of the Fredericksburg sprawl, then west on Route 3 to Culpeper, then south on 29 to a series of smaller roads through the Blue Ridge passes. He estimated 6 hours in normal conditions. In current conditions, with detours, obstacles, and the need to scout ahead on foot at every blind turn, he said 12 to 16 hours, maybe more. We'd leave at first light on day 36. That gave us 1 day to prep. The evening before departure, I sat with the Quantico group for dinner. It was canned chili and instant rice, same as every night. But it felt different. We'd been together for 3 weeks. We'd survived together. And now we were choosing different futures based on different fears. And both sets of fears were completely rational. Priya's daughter, Alma, gave Dara a drawing she'd made. It was the Kroger, with stick figures on the roof, and a yellow sun that took up half the sky. Dara held it like it was made of glass. I told the Quantico group that if things went wrong up there, the Shenandoah door would be open. I told them the frequency. I told them we'd listen for them every day at 6 and 1800. Glenn shook my hand and said, "You might be making a mistake." I said, "I know. You might be too." He almost smiled at that. Then he went to check the truck, and I went to the roof to record this. Because tomorrow, everything changes. And I wanted there to be a record of the last night when 23 people still had a choice. Day 36, 05:45. The sky is barely gray. I'm recording from the passenger seat of the box truck. Marcus is driving. Dara is behind us in the sedan with the Volkov family. The Quantico group left 20 minutes ago. We stood in the loading dock and watched their taillights until they turned north on Route 1 and the building blocked the view. Priya didn't look back. I don't blame her. Looking back would have made it harder, and she'd already made the hard choice. Our truck is loaded tight. Food for 10 days. Water for 5, with purification tablets for more. The weapons. Fuel cans strapped to the roof rack. 14 people in 2 vehicles. The 4 children are in the sedan because it's quieter and faster if something goes wrong. The adults who aren't driving are in the box truck's cargo area with the supplies, sitting on sleeping bags, trying not to think about the fact that they can't see outside. I'm going to keep recording during the drive. Not continuously, but at waypoints. And when something happens, and when I need to process what I'm seeing. This recorder is the closest thing I have to another brain. And today I want to sign her. I need every bit of processing power I can get. Route 1 South is bad. We knew that. The corridor between Fredericksburg and Massaponax is dense suburban sprawl, which means dense dead population. Marcus is driving at a steady 20 miles an hour, fast enough to outpace walkers, slow enough to see obstacles and stop. The sedan follows at 50 yards, close enough to keep visual contact, far enough that if we stop suddenly they won't rear-end us. First mile, 7 dead visible, scattered, reacting to engine noise but too far from the road to intercept. One was standing in the median, not moving at all, just standing there in a hospital gown, facing east, like it was waiting for something. I've seen that before. Some of them just stop, stand in one place for days. No stimulus, no movement, no apparent reason. It's the ones who stop that bother me most, because at least the walkers are doing something I can predict. We reach the Route 3 junction at 0620. West turn, toward the mountains, toward whatever's actually there. The stretch of Route 3 between Fredericksburg and Culpeper is 35 miles of rolling Virginia countryside. Horse farms, vineyards, small crossroads towns with names like Locust Grove and Wilderness. Before, it was a pleasant drive. Now it's an exercise in sustained attention that is physically exhausting. Every intersection requires a decision. Go through or go around. The dead collect at intersections, because intersections are where cars stopped, and where cars stopped is where people died, and where people died is where the dead stand now, performing their empty parody of a traffic jam. We went around most of them. Shoulder, then ditch, then field edge, then back to pavement. The box truck handled it. Barely. Marcus has a feel for the vehicle's limits that borders on intuition. And twice he threaded gaps that I would have said were too narrow. At mile 19, we hit our first real stop. A jackknife tractor trailer blocked both lanes and both shoulders. The cab was burned. The trailer had torn open and spilled what looked like cases of bottled water across the road. And maybe 30 dead were milling through the debris, picking up bottles and dropping them, picking them up and dropping them, over and over. We could not go around. Woods pressed close on both sides, too dense for the truck. Marcus shut the engine off. The dead hadn't oriented on us yet. We were 200 yards back, downwind, engine cooling. I got out and walked forward with Joel and a woman named Cassie, who'd been a landscape contractor and was the strongest person in our group regardless of gender. We each carried a spear and moved along the tree line, staying low, watching the cluster. The plan was simple. We needed to clear a path wide enough for the truck. That meant moving the dead away from a specific section of road, not fighting through them. We'd learned weeks ago that fighting 30 is not a plan. Distraction is a plan. Joel had a road flare. We circled north through the trees, placed the flare on the pavement about 100 yards past the wreck, lit it, and ran back to the tree line. The hiss and sputter pulled them, not all at once. The closest ones turned first, then the others followed. That accumulation instinct, each one drawn not by the flare, but by the movement of the one ahead of it. Within 4 minutes, the road near the trailer was almost clear. Marcus started the engine and moved. The truck squeezed through a gap between the trailer's rear axle and the guardrail with maybe 6 inches of clearance on each side. Dara followed in the sedan. We jogged along the shoulder and caught up as they slowed past the wreck. Back in the truck, hearts pounding. Nobody hurt. But the flare was still burning behind us, and the dead were still clustered around it. And when it burned out, they'd disperse along the road in our direction, pulled by the memory of engine noise. That's the thing about the dead. You don't solve them. You borrow time from them. Every solution is temporary. Every clear road is a road that will fill again. The only permanent answer is distance, and we were burning fuel to buy it. We reached the outskirts of Culpeper at 09:15. The town was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of empty where you know the population didn't evacuate because the cars are all still there. They just stopped being alive. And then they walked somewhere else, following some sound or some residual pattern. And the town waits behind them like a shell. We didn't stop. Marcus pushed through on the bypass, westward, toward the mountains. Route 29 south took us to Warrenton, then smaller roads toward the Blue Ridge. The mountains appeared around noon as a dark line on the western horizon, and something shifted in the truck when people saw them. A quietness that wasn't fear, more like the feeling of approaching something that was either going to save you or wasn't. And there was no way to know which until you arrived. The roads narrowed as we climbed. 2 lanes, no shoulder. The dead thinned to almost nothing. Marcus had predicted this. Population density drops in the mountains, which means reanimated density drops too. The danger shifts from the dead to the road itself, because a breakdown here means walking. And walking means carrying what you can and leaving the rest. At 13:20, we reached the first pass, a gap in the ridge that the road threaded through with steep wooded slopes on both sides. And there, across the road, was a barricade. Not makeshift, engineered. 2 shipping containers arranged in a V-shape with a gap just wide enough for one vehicle, backed by sandbags and what looked like a raised observation platform built from lumber. A cable gate stretched across the gap. 2 people stepped out, a man and a woman, both armed with compound bows. The man held up a hand, palm out. Marcus stopped the truck. I got out with my hands visible. The man asked where we were coming from and how many we had. I told him. He asked if anyone was bitten or sick. I said no. He said they'd need to verify that, and was I willing to submit to an inspection? I said yes. The inspection was thorough, respectful, and quick. They checked every person, including the children, for bite marks, fever, and signs of infection. They did it in the open, with explanations. And they asked permission before touching anyone. When they finished with the Volkov children, the woman gave each kid a granola bar from her vest pocket. The man's name was Dean. He said we were at the eastern checkpoint of the Anchor Cooperative. He radioed ahead on a walkie-talkie and said, 14 inbound. Fredericksburg Group. They look real. A voice came back. Copy. Tell them welcome. Hot food at the Commons. I heard Dara make a sound behind me. Just a short breath. But it carried something I hadn't heard from anyone in weeks. Not relief exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like she'd been holding a picture in her mind of what survival could look like. And she'd just been told it wasn't imaginary. We drove through the gap in a single file. The road descended into the valley, and the trees opened up. And there it was, a small town. I don't know its original name, but it was active. People in the streets, not hurrying. Structures reinforced but not fortified into bunkers. Garden plots between buildings, turned earth, things actually growing. A water tower, smoke from cook fires. The sound, which I hadn't even realized I'd been missing, of human voices overlapping in casual, unhurried conversation. Marcus parked the truck where Dean indicated. Everyone got out. Nobody said much. The Volkov kids ran toward a group of children near a swing set that someone had reassembled in a parking lot. Day 36. We made it somewhere. Whether it's the right somewhere is tomorrow's problem. They gave us a building, former insurance office, single story, carpeted, with working windows and a propane heater that someone had vented through a hole cut in the ceiling. It was the most comfortable space I'd been inside in a month, and I sat on the floor and did not move for about 20 minutes. The hot food was real. Bean soup with actual vegetables from the gardens, cornbread from a supply of cornmeal that a woman named Terry, who'd been a school cafeteria manager, had organized into a rationing schedule. I watched Joel eat 3 bowls and then sit back with an expression that I can only describe as bewildered grief, because something as simple as warm food made him realize how far gone we'd been. Lena Park came to meet us in the evening. She was shorter than her voice suggested, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, a face that defaulted to neutral in a way that could read as either calm or guarded, depending on what you expected. She'd been a city planner for Staunton before everything. She said that planning for utilities and zoning turned out to be surprisingly transferable to planning for post-collapse community organization. She didn't give a speech. She walked us through the setup, answered questions, and introduced us to the 5-member council. Then she said something I've been thinking about ever since. She said, "We're not a refuge, we're a project. The difference is that a refuge just tries not to die. A project tries to become something. We're trying to figure out how people live together when every external structure is gone. And we don't know if we'll succeed. But we think the attempt matters, even if we fail." Dara asked about the medical situation. Lena introduced her to the 2 people running health services, a retired general practitioner named Mohan, who was 70 and had arthritis in both hands, and a 26-year-old paramedic named Sasha, who had more energy than experience. Dara looked at me after talking with them and said, "I can help here. I can actually help." That night, lying on the carpet of the insurance office with 13 other people breathing around me, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from the disorientation of being somewhere that functioned, where people talked about next week, where the word tomorrow meant a plan, not a threat. I got up and went outside. The sky was clear and the stars were outrageous, the way they always are now without light pollution. A woman on watch nodded to me from the corner of the building. I nodded back, stood there for a while, just breathing. Over the next 3 days, I made it my business to understand Anchor. Not the sales pitch, the reality. The population was 63 before we arrived. Now, 77. The town occupied roughly 4 square blocks of a former village called Glendale, which had been small enough before the collapse that clearing the dead was manageable. They'd done it systematically in the first week, building by building, with teams of 5 using construction tools. 11 dead total inside the village limits. The rural density was that low. The valley geography was the real asset. Mountains on 3 sides, a river on the 4th. 2 road passes, both barricaded. The dead would have to climb steep, wooded terrain to approach from any other direction. And they don't climb well. Their motor coordination is functional on flat ground, but degrades on inclines. Everyone here knew that. It was one of the first rules they'd established through observation. The council system worked roughly the way Lena had described on the broadcast. 5 members, serving 30-day terms, chosen by a simple hand-raised vote at a monthly meeting. Any adult could stand. Lena had served on the first 2 councils and then declined the 3rd, saying she didn't want to become permanent. The current council was Mohan, a former electrician named Hayes, a woman named Doritha, who'd been a high school principal, a young guy named Benny, who mostly represented the voices of people under 25, and Dean, the checkpoint guard who'd waved us through. Decisions about daily labor were made by the council. Decisions about long-term direction were made by full assembly. Disputes went to a mediation pair chosen from non-council members. If mediation failed, the assembly voted. Was it perfect? No. I sat in on a council session on day 38 and watched Hayes and Doretha disagree about generator priority for 20 minutes with a sharpness that bordered on hostility. Mohan mediated. They compromised. Nobody stormed out. Nobody was punished. But it was messy and slow. And I understood viscerally why someone like Bryce would look at that process and say, "This is inefficient. Let me just decide." The difference is that the messiness was the point. Disagreement resolved through argument is exhausting. Disagreement suppressed through authority is a bomb with a delayed fuse. I'd take the exhaustion. I worked the garden plots on day 38. Benny showed me the irrigation system they'd built from PVC pipe and a hand pump drawing from the river. It was clever and labor-intensive, and produced enough food to supplement but not replace their stored supply. He said they needed 6 more months of growth to reach anything close to self-sufficiency. He said it casually, like 6 months was a planning horizon instead of an impossible gulf. And I realized that was the cultural difference between this place and everywhere I'd been. They planned like there would be a future. And planning like that made it more likely to be true. On day 39, I started helping with the broadcast. Lena's setup was simple. A modified amateur shortwave transmitter running off a car battery charged by a solar panel. Range was maybe 150 miles on a good atmospheric day, less if conditions were poor. She broadcast twice daily, always the same message with updated population count and conditions, always ending with a frequency and an invitation to respond. She told me they'd made contact with 11 groups since they started. 6 had come. 3 had gone silent. 2 were too far away to attempt the journey and were maintaining radio-only contact, sharing observations and survival data. I asked if she'd ever considered that the broadcast could attract the wrong kind of attention. She said of course. She said it was a calculated risk, and that the alternative was isolation. And that isolation was its own kind of dying. She let me sit in on the evening broadcast, watched her key the mic and speak with that same measured calm I'd heard on the Tascam. At the end, she opened the channel for responses. Static, more static. Then a voice, thin and far away, a man somewhere in West Virginia saying he had 8 people and a school bus and could he make it over the mountains. Lena told him the route, told him the checkpoints, told him to approach slow and hands visible. After the broadcast, she looked at me and said, 85, if they make it. I said, "Is there a number where you start worrying?" She said, "I started worrying at 12. The number where I stop worrying doesn't exist. I just worry and plan at the same time." I helped her draft the next morning's broadcast. We added information about road conditions on Route 29 based on our transit. We added a description of the Culpeper bypass. We added a note about the tractor-trailer blockage and the workaround, in case anyone was following the same route. This is what I'd been missing, not just safety, purpose. The daily act of doing something that extended past your own survival. At the Kroger, every day was about not dying. Here, not dying was the baseline. Above that baseline was the actual work, building something that might outlast any individual in it. I thought about Emmett and his recorder. He'd been doing the same thing, hadn't he? Documenting not for himself, but for whoever came after. The impulse to leave a record is the impulse to believe in a future reader, a future listener, a future person who will care what happened here, I'm still recording, not for broadcast, just for this. Just so there's a voice somewhere that says, on day 39, 77 people were alive in a valley in Virginia. And they were arguing about irrigation schedules and generator priority and how to welcome strangers. And it was tedious and contentious and real. And it was the most human thing I'd seen since the world ended. Day 40 is tomorrow. The school bus from West Virginia might arrive. Or it might not. The garden needs weeding. The east checkpoint needs a roof repair before the rain. Dara is training Sasha on wound closure. Marcus is reinforcing the south barricade. There's work to do. There's always work to do. That's the answer, I think. That's what survival actually looks like. Not the dramatic last stand, not the desperate flight, just the next task, agreed upon, divided fairly, done together. There's something I haven't addressed in these recordings, and I need to, because ignoring it doesn't make it smaller. Bryce knows we came here, Glenn told him. And 4 days ago, Dean reported that a truck drove up to the east checkpoint, sat there for 10 minutes, and drove away. It wasn't one of ours. It came from the north. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a stranger who saw the barricade and got nervous. But the timing and the direction sit wrong. And when I mentioned it to Marcus, his face did the thing it does when he's already war-gamed a scenario 3 moves past where I am. He said, "A man like Bryce doesn't lose people. He collects them. And a group that turned him down and then successfully established somewhere else isn't just a loss. It's an alternative. Alternatives are dangerous to men who need to be the only option." I don't know if Marcus is right. I don't know if Bryce would actually try to project force 30 miles into the mountains over a perceived insult. But I know that the history of the world is full of exactly that. Men who could not tolerate the existence of a functioning community that operated on principles different from their own. The dead didn't invent that. They just cleared the obstacles that used to prevent it. So we're preparing. Quietly. Marcus has a defensive plan for the checkpoints that he's shared with the council. Dean is training a second watch team. We're caching emergency supplies at a fallback position further up the valley, in case we have to abandon the town and rebuild. And I'm recording this because if something happens, I want there to be a record that we saw it coming and we chose to prepare instead of preemptively attack. Because the day we become what we're afraid of is the day survival stops meaning anything. I still think about Priya. I hope she's all right. I hope Alma is drawing pictures on new walls with new markers. I hope Glenn is sleeping well and Bryce is treating them fairly and I was wrong about everything I saw that day. But I also hope Priya remembers the frequency. 1,800 hours, every day. The channel is open. This is Nolan Rigby, Anchor Cooperative, Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. Day 40. We're here. We're building. If you can hear this and you need somewhere to come, head west. Approach the passes slow, hands where we can see them. We'll check you for bites and feed you hot soup and ask you what you're good at. We have room. We have work. We have a vote and a voice for everyone who shows up. And if you're out there alone, running some dead-air frequency on a handheld and wondering whether it's worth the fuel to try, I want you to hear this clearly. It's worth the fuel. Come west. Day 41, 0550. The bus from West Virginia arrived last night. Not 8 people, 12. The driver, a man named Curtis, said they'd picked up a family of 4 on the road outside Elkins who were walking with a shopping cart. Walking with a shopping cart. A man, a woman, and 2 teenage boys, pushing everything they had in a Walmart cart down a mountain highway. They'd been walking for 9 days. They're in the commons now. Mohan checked them over. Dehydrated, but intact. The younger boy has a sprained ankle that Dara wrapped. The older boy hasn't spoken since they arrived. His mother says he stopped talking on day 12 and she doesn't push him. 89 people. That's the morning count. I watched the sunrise from the garden plot where I've been working. The mountains catch the early light in a way that makes the valley floor stay blue and cool for the first hour while the ridgelines burn orange. It's beautiful. I feel strange writing that. I feel strange that beauty is still possible, still available, still registering in my brain alongside the constant awareness that the world outside these mountains is full of the walking dead and the living worst of us. But it is beautiful. And I think that's important. Not because beauty saves you. It doesn't. But because noticing it means the part of you that existed before all this is still there. Still functioning. Still yours. Dara brought me coffee this morning. Actual coffee. From a stash that Terry had been rationing carefully. 1 pot per week for the whole community. It was weak and slightly burnt. And I held the cup with both hands and breathed the steam. And I will remember that cup of coffee for the rest of my life. The council meets at 8 to discuss winter prep. There's a debate about whether to send a scouting team to a National Guard armory that Dean thinks is about 20 miles south. There's a proposal to start evening classes for the children, because Doretha says that education is infrastructure, and if we stop teaching, we lose something we can't rebuild. I agree with her. But I also know that today's debate will be loud and slow, and somebody will get frustrated, and somebody else will say something they regret, and we'll work through it anyway. That's the plan. Work through it. Every day. Together. 1,800 hours. I'm sitting next to Lena at the transmitter. She's asked me to do today's broadcast. My hands are dirty from the garden, and I haven't combed my hair in a week. And I'm talking into a microphone that's held together partly with electrical tape. Here's what I said. I'm transcribing it here because I want a written version. For Emmett. For whoever finds this recorder, for whatever comes after us. This is Anchor Cooperative Broadcasting on AM 1640 from the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. Today is day 41. Our population is 89. Weather is clear, temperature 62 degrees. Road conditions on Route 29 south of Warrenton are passable with caution. The Route 3 corridor between Culpeper and Fredericksburg has moderate foot traffic and should be transited at speed. The Blue Ridge passes are clear and staffed. Approach from the east on the main road. Come slow, come visible. We have shelter, food, water, and medical support. We operate on a council system. Every person votes. Every person works. Every person eats. If you leave with your share and our good wishes. We are not the only option. We are not the best option. We are an option that believes you should get to choose, and we will never make that choice for you. We transmit at 0600 and 1800 daily. This frequency is open for response. If you are alone, we hear you. If you are afraid, so are we. If you are tired of running, we have walls and beds and work that matters. Come west, we have room. Lena nodded when I finished. Didn't say anything, just keyed the mic off and started the battery swap procedure for the next cycle. I sat there for a minute, listening to the static. Somewhere in that static, I have to believe, someone was listening. Someone in a dark room with a hand crank radio, or a truck cab, or a rooftop. Someone doing the math of distance and fuel and risk the way I did 2 weeks ago. Maybe they'll come. Maybe they won't. But the signal went out. The invitation stood. And tomorrow morning, we'll send it again. That's the job now. Not surviving, building, not holding on. Reaching out. Late evening now. I'm on roof watch. The stars are ridiculous again. Marcus came up an hour ago and sat with me without talking for a while. Then he said he'd been thinking about Bryce, and about the truck at the checkpoint, and about what kind of world grows out of this. He said there would be more Bryces. Everywhere the dead had cleared the ground. There would be men who saw emptiness as territory and survivors as resources. He said it wasn't a prediction. It was a pattern as old as the species. I said I knew. He said, "So what do we do?" I said, "We build something worth defending and we defend it. And we make sure the thing we're defending is still worth it after we're done defending it." He thought about that. Then he said, "That's harder than just winning." Yeah, it is. The valley is dark below us. A few lights in the commons where the night crew is working on inventory. The checkpoint lanterns are visible as tiny points on the pass road. Beyond the mountains, nothing. No glow on the horizon where cities used to burn electric, just the dark. And somewhere in it, the dead, walking their patient circles, and the living, making their choices. I'm going to end this recording soon. Not because the story is over. It isn't. It won't be for a long time. But because I need to sleep. And tomorrow, Dara is teaching me wound irrigation. And Benny wants help expanding the South Garden plot. And the council is voting on the armory expedition. And there's that bus driver, Curtis, who apparently knows small engine repair, which means we might finally fix the second generator. There's so much to do. I'll record again tomorrow. Day 42, whatever it brings. This is Nolan Rigby, Anchor Cooperative. Shenandoah Valley. The signal is out. The channel stays open. If you're listening, we're here. Come west.